a lot of guys will seek out my channel because they're not satisfied in their dating lives. They want to get a girlfriend. They want to have more options. They want to make women attracted to them. And so they're trying to learn, some tips, some strategies, a little bit about female psychology. But there is one thing that a lot of men completely overlook, but if they were to implement, is an absolute guarantee to improve their dating life, which is their capacity to handle rejection. Because if you're the kind of guy who learns all the theory there is to learn on the internet and practices, but after, 2 or 3 times a night or in a day, you've got rejected, that's as much as your ego can handle, and so you've got to head home, then obviously your options are going to be limited. Your experience is going to be stifled. If you are imagining yourself, like hypothetical, as though you don't bother at all by rejection, like it doesn't faze you in the slightest, you can just handle 100, 200, 500 rejections in a day, but you just keep going, your dating life would explode, because dating for men is largely a numbers game. But a lot of men have a lot of sensitivity to rejection. And despite what I've just said in terms of, well, obviously, practically speaking, it would improve things, it's not as though that sensitivity is entirely negative. It was put in you by evolution for a certain reason. But you need to understand the origins of those fears that we have for rejection and then try and make them work for you, not against you. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about rejection. So we'll start off the conversation by asking Matt. Matt, were you the kind of guy who got rejected a lot in your dating life?
No, I didn't. And that's not to compliment myself for being so good, is what it was. Is I took a very gradualist approach in all of my approach. And what I would do is there's a very brief summary. I would only go so far as to know that my next move would be successful. So it took longer, but I got way less rejection. And I actually got a whole lot of practice because I just kept my practice at the level at which I was already succeeding. So a very much what's called a zone of proximal development kind of thing. So my rejections were either extremely subtle to the point where I didn't feel terribly hurt by them, or they just didn't happen. A lot of guys who are just go full on cold approach, straight up, try to make things happen, full blast, they'll get rejected a whole lot more than I was because I just didn't do that approach for the most part.
Do you think that you were missing out on some opportunities though? Like if you play it sort of safe
Sure.
all of the time, I would imagine that the downside of that is that those guys who are just sort of like scorched earth, get in there and conquer, they're opening themselves up to a lot of situations and opportunities that you're not, because you're more nervous about preserving perhaps your ego.
Yeah, so totally fair. And that certainly was part of it at first. But once I built myself up to the skill level where I was quite confident, then I did actually try a little bit more directly and would sometimes get rejected. But I didn't just go through like a mountain of rejections to gain skill. I just dramatically reduced my range of competence that I was working on. Like, just get good at starting conversations. Don't worry about phone numbers. Don't worry about dates. Don't worry about getting laid. Don't worry about getting a girlfriend. Don't worry about anything. Like, just ask for the time, have that be level 1, and then build 100 levels all the way to asking explicitly for a date or sex to happen right now. Like, that's the kind of most extreme thing you could ask for. And some guys I actually think it's ego for them to think like, I need to make this happen fast, so I'm just going to like bulldoze my way through rejections. It's a little bit like running through a bunch of tree branches to get through really quickly, as opposed to like carefully navigating through. So not only do you get through, it takes slightly longer, you're not covered in blood and scratches, and you haven't knocked any birds out of their nests. So it's a weird analogy, but you know what I mean.
Well, it's interesting. I think we're always going to have the tendency to interpret our own behavior in the best possible kind of terms.
Yes,
but
I am.
A lot of guys who will try that more gradual step-by-step kind of process, while it sounds like it was sincere for you, it's actually a rationalization to prevent them from taking any risks or whatever. So this will be good for the audience, because my experience coming up through dating was not yours. I was not the gradual approach guy. I was the crash and burn or blaze through in glory kind of guy. So I had experienced like a lot of rejection. And from that, I've come to appreciate your approach a lot more, although there's a moral hazard, I think, of men interpreting it in the wrong way. When you do the gradual approach properly, it's actually better. It protects your self-esteem, because the rejection is not an easy thing to rationalize away, the implications for what it means about your quality as a man. And we will talk about that in a moment. But I'll just start off by saying, from my own experience, my own experience of rejection was that it numbed out really quickly. I didn't believe that it would. The rejections that I experienced when I first started pickup were like soul crushing. Like I attached so much significance to it. I was like, oh my God, I'm such a loser. Like no one's going to find me attractive. Like I can't believe I just said that. That was so awkward. And it kind of, the pain of it caused me to bounce out of sets way earlier than I should have, like, perhaps like if I'd pushed to get her phone number and ask her a date, like maybe there's like a 50-50 chance, but I didn't want to experience that pain of rejection. So while she's still smiling and laughing and enjoying my company, I'd be like, hey, look, I got to head on. It was great chatting to you. That way I could at least leave feeling good about myself, but then I wasn't taking those opportunities. I wasn't pushing on. But that was obviously just a stage that I had to go through. And then eventually I was pushing through enough that rejection was happening all of the time, because I was just suddenly, instead of doing like 2 or 3 girls that I might approach in a day and feel really good about myself, it was like 20 or 30. And so just increasing those numbers inevitably meant that there was going to be a lot more rejections. And I also got kind of flippant, I was sort of like, like I'm not going to put in like a crazy amount of energy. I'm not going to invest too much in this. Like I'm going to be a bit cocky, a bit out there. We'll see if it works, like who knows? And of course, sometimes you win big. Sometimes you say something really dumb and you crash, kind of burn. But I found that I cared less and less and less. And so for people who haven't experienced this before, let me tell you from my own personal experience, rejection gets way, way easier to deal with the more that you do it, because you come to the important realization that it's not personal. It's so rarely personal. Sometimes you'll screw up what you say, or you're trying to get with a girl way beyond you in terms of quality. But when you're practicing this stuff, if you approach 5 girls in the exact same way, the exact same energy, and you get 5 different responses, then obviously drawing any inferences about you as a person or your quality from those responses is completely ludicrous. It doesn't make any sense of reality. The truth is that girl's in a bad mood. That girl's in a good mood. That girl's a boyfriend. That girl's on a rush. She's on her way to work. This girl is, just had a fight with her boyfriend. She's super receptive to your energy. None of that has anything to do with you. And when you have enough experience, you realize the rejection isn't personal, and you're much more able to deal with it. So let me ask you, Matt, when you did start to be a little bit more bold and you did experience a bit more rejection, how did you handle it? Were you very sensitive to it? Did it rock you emotionally, or are you a bit detached?
I think I was more detached when I really started to allow it to happen more often. But the reason why is because for several years before I was really getting into that, I had sales jobs. And you want to practice getting rejected, try cold calling, right? Like that, people will hang up on you, and that hurts a lot. It maybe doesn't quite hurt as much as, it depends on how you get rejected, because you can be rejected in a very subtle way where a woman just fails to like take you up very enthusiastically on your offer to go on a hike. Like that's technically a rejection. But if she tells you like, fuck off, asshole, like that's a real rejection. And someone hanging up on you when you're trying to sell them something feels more like the latter. But just to briefly comment, I forget, there's some really famous investor, I forget which one it is, shows how much I know about finance, who has a famous quote where he describes his wealth making strategy as risk small but often, right? And so that's kind of what I did. I totally grant your warning that the I'm taking the gradualist approach is a cover for I'm not challenging myself because it's very safe here, just like high-fiving strangers and then never going anything further. So you need to keep pushing yourself, which means you will get small rejections, but you can usually see them coming in a lot of contexts when you start to be really socially aware. And so you don't even ask when you know it's not going to work. And you can find out pretty quickly if it's not going to work by going for it anyway and proving your intuition right 99% of the time. Anyway, rejection hurts a hell of a lot less when you start to get used to it, when you learn it's not personal, and when you learn that for the most part, some simple tweaks make it go away. And so it can't be personal if it's that variable, depending on subtle aspects of your behavior.
Well, let's talk about what the origin of why it does feel so personal to start off with. Now, I think that first of all, just talk about the psychological stuff, in that any insecurities that you have about yourself, that could be from previous girls, could be from how your family related to you, God knows, but whatever your self-esteem deficiencies are, when a girl rejects you, it's like, she must see all of that bad stuff in me. Like, even though she doesn't know anything about you, it seems to be that she must know that I'm a chump, I'm a loser because of all of these sort of reasons. And so it's just that the rejection acts as a kind of trigger point, as an avalanche for all of that self-doubt to come to you, because usually you're able to sort of avoid those thoughts and feelings. But when you've actually had a person look at you up and down and say, no, I'm not interested, it's just so tempting for all of those insecurities to come to the front and say, I told you so. Like, who are you to expect anybody would ever want you? But there's also an evolutionary basis for this. And Matt, in a previous episode, did a really fantastic quote about this, which was that something along the lines of women are scared that men are going to be violent to them, but men are scared that women are going to laugh at them. Do you remember when you told me that one, Matt?
Yeah, and there's a deeper reason to why that is. Yeah, women's greatest fear is being murdered by a man, and a man's greatest fear is being laughed at by a woman.
Yeah.
Right. And laughed at in a specific way is to suggest that he is not worth her sexual attention. And the reason why that's such a big deal is because obviously a man killing a woman ends her line in that sense. But a woman rejecting a man sexually and essentially announcing and publicizing that all the other women should also reject him, because that often happens. She is saying, you get to live the rest of your life knowing that you're a failed genetic experiment. We don't want any more of you. Like, that is fucking existentially brutal. It's so gnarly to suggest to a man. And so it's not light stuff to be sexually rejected by lots and lots of women. It's quite deeply upsetting to one's soul.
Man, I felt that when you said that, and you're not even a girl saying it to me. I'm not even being rejected right now, but what was the term you used? You're a failed genetic experiment.
Is that what I said? God damn, that's harsh.
It's so harsh. Oh my God. But that's kind of the feeling that comes over men, because it's true what Matt's saying.
That's what they feel like. Yeah.
Even though we live in these mega cities, nowadays, so much of the population, and really, if a girl rejects you, like there are so many more women out there. That's not the environment where our instincts evolved. We grew up in very small tribes of a couple of hundred people. And, when you're a 14, 15-year-old boy, you're trying to find your partner to express all of your, hormones with. There's probably only like 5, 10 girls of like a similar age that are viable prospects for you to be with. And guess what? They're all friends. They all talk to each other. And so if you approach one of them and say like, hey, I'd like to, pass on my genes with you. Can you be my partner? If she was to reject you, if she was to laugh at you, all the other girls would see that. They'd gossip. And so legitimately, her rejection could mean rejection forever. Like, that's it. You're done. You're not going to be a sexual being. You're not going to pass on your genes. Your life is a failed genetic experiment. And I think that contributes as our instinct for why some men are so terrified of rejection, because it can feel as though your life is on the line based on what happens here, which is another reason why I do encourage men to experience some rejection, and doing sales is such a good idea from that perspective, because you learn so quickly that it's not personal. For me, it was activism. I was on the streets handing out flyers and DVDs and stuff like that. And again, you just deal with the people so much that you're like, right, cool, none of this is personal, and it desensitizes you to it. But it's an important thing. But then here's an interesting question. Can you go further than that? Like, not just desensitize yourself to the pain of rejection. If it's truly good for you, can you learn to like rejection? Can you actually feel like, yes, I like getting rejected? What do you think of that, Matt?
Yeah, well, if a guy tells me he likes rejection, either he has done some very impressive work on his dopamine reward pathway plasticity, very well could be, or he's just rationalizing and it's bullshit. Like, you don't need to like rejection. And if you're telling yourself that you like it, if you're doing that to like get yourself moving and running forward at full steam because you just need the practice, okay, I get what you're doing. It's kind of a game. You're playing with your mind. But if you don't want to go that far, I think that's unnatural. It's like when people say they like the feeling of being sore muscularly after a workout, like, I know what they mean because it's a signal. Oh, yes, that means I worked really hard. But you can get addicted to that soreness to the point where you're chasing it and it's actually bad for you because you don't want to be so sore that you can't sit down in the toilet. It's not a good goal to have. And so it's a very naive goal, I think, if a man tells me that he is actively pursuing rejection because he thinks it's a good thing. So it's a bit harsh. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's useful. And we can be rational about this and recognize that, okay, there's lessons to be learned from the pain, right? Like, it will. A couple of things is that you can reflect on the lack of it being personal, or it can be like, well, what are these insecurities is bringing up for me? Now I can go away and work on them now that they've come up, or it's proof that I'm making progress. I'm taking more risks. I'm showing more courage. There's all of that stuff, but it's never actually going to go into the realm of actually being like a pleasurable kind of experience. It's more just like, we're going to make the best of this situation.
Can I actually plug another channel? I think Wheat Waffles had a debate with a guy named Coach Whitepill. If you heard of that guy, and they were talking about this
What the hell's
exact
the
topic
white pill?
about.
Sorry, you tell me this story first, and I'll.
The white pill is essentially the opposite of the black pill. According to the people who are subscribers to it, it's essentially the idea that there is hope. We're all going to make it like dating as possible, even if you're an average guy. It's just it's a rejection of the black pill, and you might actually fall in line with some of that. Anyway, you're a gray pill. The they got into that debate about this point about this subtle difference between liking rejection versus knowing that rejection is a inevitability that you don't need to take personally and that you can actually use as evidence that, hey, at least you tried. That's better than not even trying. And it's just a phase you pass through. Even though you do ultimately want to get to the point where you're getting accepted, getting rejected is better than hiding in the background and saying, well, at least I didn't get rejected, even though I never left my basement. You know, that's in that sense, I think he's making a good argument that it's just one step forward on a many step path.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a little bit of an argument to be said, though, that as a man, you're going to have to learn to steel yourself against rejection. And it almost feels like those men that can find some perverse pleasure in failing have a real natural advantage in that when you hear some of the success stories about the people who made it to like the top of society, you hear they had like 5 failed ventures before them. And for guys who are more sensitive to rejection or failure, you know, when they find out the world doesn't want their ideas, doesn't want their products, they slink away and they lose their confidence and they go with something that's just predictable and stable. Whereas the person who's just like either dogged in their like their self-belief that they're just ignoring all the feedback they're getting, they're like narcissistic or something like that, or even to the point where they're just like, no, that's be expected. They have so much more success, it seems, because they just don't seem to attribute much meaning to their failure, but they attribute a massive amount of meaning to their success. Like I remember speaking to the parents of one of my male friends about their stock portfolio, and they were talking so casually like, oh, we lost this massive fortune, you know, last month because, you know, the stock market's down. But, you know, we made this fortune the month before because everything was up. And the figures that they were talking about stressed me out so much. I was thinking, God, like, you know, they were quite philosophical. They didn't seem to be that concerned. But for me, I would be, with having not got the experience of having massive fortunes in the stock markets and seeing them sort of fluctuate, I would be thinking like, oh yeah, like I'm doing well when it's going up. But when it's going down, I'm like, what didn't I see? Why didn't I move my money? Why didn't I buy those stocks? Like I would be beset by that. I don't know if I'd be able to take that bigger philosophical greater vantage point, except that had I had a lot of practice with it, like I've had in the dating market with a lot of rejection. So it's like, oh, cool. I get this isn't personal. It's not necessarily about me. You got to be able to weather the storms and it's all kind of fine. And so there is, I think it's an important piece of advice to give to young guys. Do not run away from rejection. Do not read too much into rejection or to failure. As much as possible as you can learn to not attribute significance to it, the more likely you are to be successful. That's my feeling. You've got to learn important lessons and make adjustments all the time. It's not like a matter of you're ignoring the rejection, but you can't let it emotionally affect you too much without it really being to your detriment.
This is a very dangerous thing I'm about to say, but it is very much true when it comes to approaching not only just women, but potential clients and all kinds of things, is that sometimes, not always, sometimes no just means not yet, right? It does. If you get rejected, it doesn't mean that you are forever. You're already laughing because you know how that can be taken.
Yeah.
Just because you get rejected doesn't mean that you have just categorically failed and you aren't allowed to play anymore. It means go away, clean up, come back, try again in a better way. Now, of course, all the caveats that everyone is thinking on that in terms of stalking and doggedly pursuing and not taking no for a no. Like, yes, I agree with all that, but there's a subtle and yet powerful grace in recognizing that with a lot of patience for oneself and with compassion for oneself and with the desire to learn from your mistakes, that you can actually win over all kinds of people in your life, whether it's professional, whether it's romantic. It's, you know, it's it's almost trite, but there's such a value in getting back up on the horse over and over and over again. And that's how learning happens, you know? And if you can learn to maybe not like the process of failing, but just see it as part of the seasons that go through, then yeah, not only will things get better, but you'll actually become an inspiration. People will see that and say, oh, that's how you handle failure. Well, that's great. Clearly that's working. Let's try that. As opposed to like, oh, you failed. Oh no, I feel so bad for you. Oh wait. Oh, you're fine? Maybe I should be fine.
100%. The people who I admire can talk about their failures. They have a strong enough sense of self-worth that they don't need to present themselves as perfect. And I really like that failure can humble men. I like men who are still out there achieving and creating, but aren't doing it from a place of, I'm an unstoppable God who never makes mistakes. I hate guys like that. The guys are like, yep, let me tell you about all the times I've messed up. I'm like, okay, respect. I like that. And I want to finish this discussion by making it gendered a little bit to ask you, who do you think handles rejection better, men or women?
Oh God, yeah. This is a hard topic or a hard question to answer because I've seen both handle it so poorly. This may disappoint you. I really don't know if I have an answer that I would stand by comfortably, although I will say that I think when it comes to the romantic department, I think that women are given a greater license to handle rejection poorly than men are, partly because when men handle rejection poorly, it can often lead to some very unsavory crimes, whereas when women handle rejection poorly, it doesn't tend to go much beyond just her making the guy feel like shit. So maybe that asymmetry is justified, but I do see more allowances for women handling rejection poorly being something that we accept without as much criticism. What do you think?
Yes, I would agree with that. And I would say that women face rejection so much less often than men that could contribute to why they might handle it worse. But then I'd say the stakes are so much higher for men, you know? There's just only so far you can fall as a woman. That's my feeling. At the end of the day, you're still a woman. You know, your capacity to have children, which is so easy for you to do, gives you a guaranteed place of value in our society. And so your rock bottom as a woman is not even close in comparison to the rock bottom of a man. And so there's just that much further to fall. So whether they handle it better, I guess it's pointless to actually make that disparagement, but I do think that it's an asymmetrical experience. Failure for women is not the same as failure for men. They're having, I don't think I've ever spoken to a woman who really understands my need to achieve and to be accomplished in a way that actually tells me they have any understanding of what my experience is like as a man. And I've spoken to lots of men who I don't have that much in common with, who understand exactly where I'm coming from. I think it's a highly gendered experience. So that will be an interesting thing for everybody to take back into their personal lives, talk to their sisters, friends, girlfriends, whatever, to see to what degree they can actually empathize with that feeling. Because as a man, it really does feel like you're hovering over an abyss, and that if you fall, there's not really anybody who's got that much inclination to catch you. If anything, it kind of feels like society might even be applauding, oh good, natural selection is working, we're weeding out all the low males. If you want to make it, you have to succeed. That doesn't exist for women. No, I mean it exists in a small amount, but really,
yeah, no, I that instinct though, I'm feeling myself react to that because it's definitely a relatable instinct. This feeling that no one's there to catch you. And I think in a lot of, pretty progressive societies, we are trying to erect nets to catch people. But the social consequences of relying on those nets as a man are different than the social consequences of relying on those nets as a woman. And it's a very deep topic, but a lot of men have this shame around taking help. And some of that is unjustified because we all need help, right? But some of it is because we know deep in our bones that the men who really are looked up to and given the best parts of life, for the most part, are helping others and don't need much help themselves. Even if they say very humbly, oh no, I need all kinds of help, they're the ones who are lending the hands and they know it.
Yep. I'm going to take the final word on this one and just finish because I'm a little worried it's a little bit too dark what I've said. It's going to be depressing.
It's pretty dark.
I'll tell people that that feeling of being over the abyss was one of the primary motivations of pushing me into therapy, because I was like, I can't fucking handle living in a world where I feel so uncared for. And it's in like the therapy journey that I've been through, and also like the co-counseling stuff, where I've allowed myself that experience of people caring for me without independent of my accomplishments, and talking about that. And legitimately, it's like a little bit like artificial. It's not real life, but I would also say that what happens inside those sessions is a lot realer than real life. You know, it's a lot more true, and it's just done wonders for me. It's removed a level of existential angst that I thought I was going to be stuck with my entire life. And it's been so wonderful to receive that. And so anybody who's really struggling with this, as always, my recommendation is going to be seek out therapy. It can change your life.
Yeah.
All right.
Go
Thanks, guys.
to therapy. It's the best thing. Thank you.
See you guys.